We good, Tim? All right. Good evening. I wanted to do a series this week called God's Recipe for Successful Homes. And the reason why I'm showing you the slide in this way, now you're not going to be able to see any words if I leave it like that, but each night the background picture is going to be something different or something unique that has something to do with my topic for that evening. Tonight we're going to do somewhat of an introduction in regards to God's recipe for successful homes. And so I will go ahead and get this started for you, and then we will look at it from there. So slideshow, I'm beginning. Well, it didn't like the grayscale. Any reason, Tim, why it won't why I won't keep that to start the slideshow? Okay, fair enough. We might just leave it at that, okay? All right, the reason being is when we get to other slides, you're not going to be able to see the wording for it. And the point of the slide presentation is not so that you can see my family, it's so that you can see the notes, okay? Now, I am pleased that is my family. We were speaking at a church in Niagara Falls this January, and so in the process of introducing the family series to you, I want to introduce my family. My wife, Rachel, you've met, and my kids are sprinkled throughout the classes that you have, from the teenagers on down to the little guy who's in the small class. But I want to talk about God's recipe for successful homes. Now, it's a unique series, and I want to tell you a little bit about it. My dad, long time ago, wrote a book called Framework for Family. And so I had a bunch of them ordered. If you can go ahead and pass them out, of the books that are back there on the table. What's the brother's name on the left? I forget.
I'll get it.
Okay, never mind. Then he'll get it. So we're trying to start the slideshow, and it keeps wanting to change the color.
That's what happens, eh?
Apparently.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, so we'll just leave it on the grayscale where they can see all the slides on the side.
Okay, now you have to probably.
Speaking of problems and having problems in your life, if you don't have problems in your life, hold on a second. Guess what we've had problems with? PowerPoint.
All right, now
I'll get it.
back to gray.
Mm-hmm.
Let it be, and we'll have to-
Sure. Okay. All right, so as a way of introduction, I want to let you know that the books that are going to be passed out are from my dad. I will be using a lot of the material. Unfortunately, in 5 nights, we don't have the ability to cover everything. But I want to mention several things. Number one, this is God's recipe. It's not mine. It's not one that I've come up with. In the duration of this study, I suspect that we'll find things that we don't agree with. But that doesn't change the fact that this is God's recipe. And sometimes we don't like the truth. But that doesn't change the fact that it is the truth. Number two, it is a recipe. Now, what do I mean by that? The word recipe means instructions for preparing or making something, especially a food dish. So,
Just touch the second slide down more.
yep, okay. Now, this is a study for success. Why do I say that? All too often in our homes, we go into survival mode. You ever know a family that's just trying to hold on until the kids are out of the house? They're just biding their time, if not counting the days. I knew a man who kicked his kids out on their 18th birthday because he had survived them not long. He was just surviving, all right? This is for success, and not my definition of success, but God's definition of success. And so The material that you have in front of you is a lot more in depth than what we can get through this week, but we'll certainly be referencing it as well. Turn with me, if you can, in your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. Now, we're going to be looking at the home. And when I use the term home, I understand that households are different. Not every household has husband, wife, and children. Sometimes it's husband, children. Sometimes it's lady and children. Sometimes it's just a couple that's living together, married, Sometimes single people living alone. But the formula for having God's success in our homes is the same, whether we're just what would be considered a nuclear family, husband, wife, and kids, or a single person living in a home. So we're going to look at that as well. Now, Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 through chapter 6 and verse 4 will serve as a template or a launching point for what I want to deal with this week. The Bible says, "Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify it and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth it and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." Now, why is the home such an important part of our society? God has instituted three forms of administration. He instituted the home first, then he instituted government, and then in the New Testament, he instituted the church. I would strongly suggest that the failures that we find in our own culture and society stem from a failure in the home. And here's why. Without proper homes to raise people, you're not going to have proper government. You're not going to have God-honoring and God-fearing government. And without proper homes, it's very difficult to have proper churches. When our homes are in a mess, it makes it difficult for a church to function properly. And so what we find is a major failure in our homes. Now, I'm not one that thinks that the home surpasses all other responsibilities. Some people become so ingrown and so focused on their homes that they can't possibly see anything else. But there is a substantial need for good and godly homes for us to have success by his standards. Now, one thing to consider, God does not ask our opinion. He didn't, when he established the home, he didn't ask Adam by what rules or what standards Adam wanted to have his family, or Eve for that matter. So what we see here is God telling us the way he instituted it, and we need to make sure that we follow it according to his wishes. Number two, the question is simply put, are we going to follow God or no? All right? That's really the long and short of it. Are we going to obey what God says, or are we going to do things our way? That's the way it comes down to. Number three, we know that God's recipe is right. The way God instituted it is right. The Bible tells us in Mark chapter 7, verse 37, "And were beyond measure astonished, saying, He hath done all things well." So we know that what God established is right and perfect. So if there are shortcomings, it's not God's fault, right? If a child is preparing a dish or fixing some kind of food and it turns out horribly, there are one of a couple of ideas. Maybe there was something wrong with the ingredients, but more than likely, they didn't follow the recipe properly, right? Oftentimes it's not the ingredients. Usually it's not the recipe, especially if you're trying some food that you've fixed before. You know that it's the failure of the person trying to put it together. Now, there are three things that I want to look at. I want to look at the ingredients of a proper home. What goes into it? All right? There's a lot of confusion about what goes into a proper biblical home. Number two, the process. What do I mean the process? How the ingredients are used. All right, you can have all the ingredients that you need for a proper biblical home, but if you don't use them in the right manner, you're not going to have things turn out properly. And third, the conditions of the home. The conditions of the home. What condition is your home in? All right, you may have access to everything as far as what you need to have a proper biblical home or family, but if you don't have the right environment, if you don't create the right conditions, you're going to be in trouble from the start pretty quickly. Now, let me illustrate this for you if I can really quickly. It's a long illustration. Long time ago, when I was still living at home, I asked my mother if I could have chocolate chip cookies. I really wanted chocolate chip cookies. And my mom told me this. She said, honey, I don't have time. If you want chocolate chip cookies, make them yourself. It's okay, no problem. How do I do this? I've never baked or cooked anything in my life. I said, real easy. Pulled out a Betty Crocker recipe, set the recipe on the counter, and said, take these things, put it together like they say, bake it like it says, you'll have chocolate chip cookies. Now, the miracle of all miracles, I did exactly what it said, took the ingredients like it said, baked them exactly like it said, and surprise, surprise, they turned out okay. In fact, the family liked it so much that whenever they wanted chocolate chip cookies, they asked me to do it. All right? I'm an outdoors, not that kind of guy who hangs out in the kitchen, asked my wife. I'm not in there very often, but that was what happened. And so I am showing you the recipe that my mother gave me. Now, long illustration, but bear with me, okay? We're going to take this and apply this to a home, all right? It's going to take a little bit, but you'll figure it out, okay? So you see the recipe, it goes in, you need a half cup of shortening. By the way, I tripled the recipe because you don't get very many cookies with this. Half cup of shortening, half cup of sugar, quarter cup of brown sugar, 1 egg. I forgot to put on here, there's a cup of flour, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 3/4 teaspoon of salt, half teaspoon of baking soda, 6 ounces of chocolate chips, mix them all together. Their suggestion was to put the chocolate chips in at the end. I always stuck them in the middle or at the beginning because I'm lazy. Make golf ball size scoops, bake at 350 for 10 minutes, grease the pan, of course. All right, so why is that significant? I'm not a very smart man. That doesn't take very much figuring out. But I looked up when I was preparing for this series, why do you have certain ingredients for things, okay? So, those of you who are ladies, you're going to laugh that I actually did this. But for shortening, you put it in a recipe to make things tender, okay? Sugar, sweetness. Brown sugar you do for not only sweetness, but it helps keep things moist, all right? Eggs, structure or texture. Vanilla brings out the flavor. I don't know why that bar showed up. Flour brings the structure. Salt brings cohesiveness or modifies the flavor. Also serves as a preservative in a way. Baking soda helps batter to rise. Chocolate chips, of course, add taste and smell. Now, the recipe that I gave you was a very defined ratio of ingredients. So when I was preparing for this series, I sat down, looked at these ingredients, looked at the size of them, and figured out what kind of ingredients do you need in a family to be successful in God's eyes. For example, the thing that you need the most of is flour. I get to play with Dr. Brown's pointer thingy, so there we go. Flour. So for flour, it's structure. How does that equate to a home? So you have flour for structure. I equate that with church attendance. To have structure in a home, you need church attendance. And your family should structure their life around church attendance. All right? For shortening, for tenderness. All right? I equate that with devotions. Let me encourage you, if you don't do family devotions, have family devotions to keep your family's heart tender, but also encourage personal devotions if there are more than one. Sugar, sweetness, biblical education. Biblical education. Even more so than when we were kids, a true biblical education is crucial. If you want your children to believe that God created the heavens and the earth, don't send them to a school for 14 to 18 years that tells them day after day, class after class, that we came from monkeys, that one race is better than another, that one race is racist, and the list goes on and on. You need that biblical education for them. Eggs for structure and texture. Chores. Now, your eggs are not a big ratio of your recipe, but children need chores. Why do they need it? They need to understand the concept of getting a task and finishing it. I can't speak for the Milwaukee area, but I can tell you that in every other region of the country I travel and talk to employers, they can't find people who want to work. Guessing it's the same. I'm guessing Southeast Wisconsin is not incredibly unique from the rest of the world. They can't find people who want to work. They can't find people who will show up to work. They can't find people who will stay at a task. They can't find people that don't get bored with what their assignment is. That needs to start at home. Give them tasks, keep them responsible, help them to learn how to do chores. Again, not a big part of the recipe of a successful home, but it's necessary. Vanilla. Socialization. Socialization. There's a difference between biblical separation and isolation. Socialization. But again, that's a small emphasis in the recipe, right? So, we see flour, church attendance, which I mentioned. Salt, which has to do with cohesiveness and modifies flavor. Extracurricular activities. Maybe a club, maybe some kind of community event, maybe sports, maybe a musical instrument, maybe some kind of activity. Extracurricular activities can help a family, right? Is salt a big part of a chocolate chip cookie recipe? Not really. If you miss it or get the recipe off, just a little bit, and don't put quite as much in, it's not going to really make or break the recipe, but it helps. Baking soda, again, not much of an importance in the recipe, but it helps. And baking soda, I equated to entertainment. Proper entertainment can help a family. What do I mean? It's helpful when kids learn how to entertain themselves. Walk into a restaurant where there's a family and see how many of them are looking up. Exactly. They're all looking down at their device. I remember sitting in a Culver's actually just not far from here last year, and there was a family of 4, and I could have walked over and taken their food. They wouldn't have known it. I could have sat at the table. They wouldn't have known it. One could have gotten up and left and never come back. The others would not have known it. They don't know proper entertainment. They're glued to their device. They don't have it. It's a proper entertainment that we need. And then lastly, chocolate chips, which is kind of the whole point of chocolate chip cookies. Service to God. The whole point of a proper, successful home in God's eyes is service to Him. You ever gotten a cookie and you see one chocolate chip in it? That's a disappointment. Admit it. If there's a plate of chocolate chip cookies and most of them have a whole bunch and one has one, which one are you going for? I guarantee I know which one's getting left. You ever gone for a chocolate chip cookie and found out it was raisins instead? That'll cause trust issues. Yeah. Well, chocolate chips, service to God. What's the whole point of a proper, successful home? Service to God. But we need to have these things in our home as ingredients, but in their proper place. Can entertainment be a good part of a family? Yeah, in its proper place. All right, so I'm a little bit of a contrarian, so I decided I was going to mess with things. But here's what we need to do. To have the proper success in God's eyes, you not only need to have the ingredients, but you need to have the right mixture and the right foundation. You have to have the right foundation. Where's that found? That's built on the Lord Jesus Christ. That's built on His Word and following His ways. I've been studying the book of Joshua, and you find there that it's told over and over again that they were to walk in all His ways. Okay, so if we're going to have proper, successful homes, we better have the right foundation. Also, we better have the right priorities. The right priorities. Now listen to me carefully. Priorities don't conflict. They only reveal themselves. What do I mean? Let's say I love my wife, Rachel. Okay? But I deprive her of her needs, her physical needs. And I'm more concerned about my physical needs. Let's say I deprive her of the emotional support that she needs. Let's say I deprive her of the spiritual support that she needs. Let's say I'm not there for her, but I tell all of you I really love my wife Rachel and I'll do everything I can for her, but at home it's something different entirely. My priorities aren't conflicting. I'm a liar and my priorities reveal themselves. So when somebody tells you that they really, really love God, but their priorities say something different, the priorities aren't conflicting. They're just revealing what the heart says. We need to have right priorities. We need to make sure we have those in line. Next, we need discipline. Now, discipline most often is thought of as correcting. And there is definitely a need for corrective discipline in a home. But there also needs to be directing and formative discipline so that the family, the parents, grandparents, the children can be formed in the image of God and not transformed to the image of the world. There needs to be several kinds of discipline, meaning when I address my kids to try to instruct them, I need to make sure I'm not doing it only when they misbehave. Sometimes I need to go up to the kids and say, that's a good job, but here's how you could have done it better. That's a good job, and the next time I want you to do this. I want you to try that. Discipline is needed. That's part of the process of taking the recipe and making sure. It also allows for maturing. Have you ever noticed a family that has children that are of an older age, and yet they do not allow their kids to grow up? They call them helicopter moms and dads. Do you know what I mean? They're constantly surveilling, they're constantly watching and making sure. They just can't stand the thought of little Johnny or little Susie growing up. And so they never allow their kids to grow up. I worked in a home and school for juvenile delinquents for 6 years. Had a 7th grade kid in one of my classes who had never brushed his teeth. Because he lived with his grandparents and uncle, and they were afraid he wouldn't brush his teeth correctly, so they brushed his teeth for him every so often, whenever it occurred to them. And what happened was, between grandma, grandpa, and uncle, they kept forgetting because they thought the others had done it, and so in 7th grade, his teeth were a royal wreck. Furthermore, he'd never been to a dentist, so when a dental hygienist came to the school to try to show the kids how to brush their teeth and floss, this kid freaks out. They never let him grow up. However, on the side, they were letting him play violent video games, go on the internet without any instruction or supervision. He was doing all sorts of YouTube and all sorts of other things. They had no problem with that, but God forbid the boy brush his teeth on his own. He's locked up for the 3rd time since COVID started for violently threatening someone And this time he almost got killed over it. They never let him grow up. They never formatively or correctly disciplined this child. And if he's not careful, he's going to get killed in lockup or when he gets out. He would be 26 right now. And he'll probably end up dead before he's 40 because they would never do any of these things. These are serious things. We need to allow the discipline and the formative maturity. All right, so this is 2022. Kids have a say in everything, don't they? So I went to the kids, my kids, our oldest 4 kids, and I said, look, you're going to change the recipe for chocolate chip cookies. Here's how we're going to do it. Trisha, who's 9 years old, I said, look, you can look at the list of ingredients. I don't care which one. Take one out. Take one out. Katie, she's 11, add an ingredient in. All right? And then I told Reuben, switch 2 ingredients. What I mean is switch the dosages for what one ingredient gets and what another does. And then Stephen, change the process somehow. I don't care how, I don't care what you do, change it. And then mommy's going to make cookies the right way, and she's going to make the cookies your way. Hilarity ensued, all right? So here's what happens. Keep in mind, the kids have literally no idea what I have associated 2 slides or 3 slides ago in regards to what each ingredient is in the ingredients of a successful home, like flour for church attendance, okay? And so I asked the kids, I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. Trisha, take an ingredient out. And she looked at the list, and she said, okay. So she took out flour. Let me get down here to my notes. She took out flour. Flour is church attendance, all right? Do kids ever encourage their parents to miss church or cause their kids to miss church? Or do kids ever become an excuse for a family to miss church? The answer is a resounding yes, an awful lot. So Trisha took out flour, all right? How do you think the cookies are going to turn out already? Interesting, right? That's the biggest ingredient. She takes out church attendance. She takes out flour. And then I talked to Katie and I said, all right, you get to add something in. She had no idea what to add in. She said, does it have to be something you can eat? I said, nope, you're the child. You add whatever you want. I don't care. Throw it in. You're the kid. You're in charge. Strawberry shampoo. That's what she chose. She's like, why not? Strawberry shampoo. Do kids ever add anything or try to add something into the family that doesn't belong and parents tolerate it? We all know families that were like, why in the world do they do this? Why do they tolerate this? Why are they part of this activity? Why do they have this priority? Well, the parents haven't been parents and they've let the kids dictate things, and stuff that has no business in the home is put in because the parents haven't stood up and been who they need to be. So we add strawberry shampoo. Great idea, Katie. Why not? Reuben, 6 years old. He does not understand what Daddy means by switch dosages. So I said, okay, take 2 things, and I explained what they were. I said, we're going to switch them. He said, okay, that sounds good. So let's switch salt and chocolate chips. 6 ounces of chocolate chips, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Reversed. 6 ounces of salt and 3/4 of a teaspoon of chocolate chips. Yeah, it's great. Now, here's what I equated them to. Remember, the kids have no clue what I've assigned each ingredient to that you saw a little while ago. So what Reuben did was he swapped athletics, clubs, music, extracurricular activities with God's service. So instead of a lot of God's service and a little bit of extracurricular activities, we have a ton of extracurricular activities and just a little bit of God's service. Do families ever do that? Yeah. We have a family back home who's never home on the weekend, year-round, because their child is in travel sports all year long. Friday night, they leave town to go somewhere so that their child can play tournaments on Saturday and Sunday, and they come home late Sunday night. The wife of the family admitted to Rachel this year, we're never home together at night during the week. They don't know what family time is. Guess what? They have 6 ounces of salt in their house. If they have 3/4 of a teaspoon of chocolate chips, I'd be surprised. But do parents ever switch extracurricular activities with God's service and place a higher emphasis on that? Yes. We know that. How do you think these cookies are going to turn out? Because we've already switched flour and strawberry shampoo, and we've taken, and we now have 6 ounces of salt and 3/4 of a teaspoon of chocolate chips. So I go to Steve, and I said, all right, Steve, mess with the process. He said, what do you mean by that? I said, the mixture or the baking? I don't care. Mess it up somehow. Do something different. He says, all right, we're going to bake them too long. Baking is discipline. You ever known a family that spent too much emphasis on discipline? It used to happen a long time ago where there was too much emphasis on discipline. I would argue now there's not enough, right? So I asked Rachel, I put the recipe together, I explained to her what I was doing. Kids have no idea the application that you're seeing tonight when they put it together. So I forget what day of the week it was, but I'm helping Stephen do his lawns early one morning, and we're at a particular lawn, and I stop and glance at my phone, and I get this text message from Rachel. My kitchen smells like strawberries! Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Why? Because we don't have flour in the recipe. There's strawberry shampoo. So she put the combination together, stuck it in the oven. Instead of baking for 10 minutes, she baked it for 15, 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Stephen said do it 30 minutes. Even after 30 minutes, they were still a gooey, total mess. She could not get them out of, you ended up having to put them in cupcake pans because the batter had no substance to it. Why? There's no church attendance. There's strawberry shampoo instead of the flour. And so she had to put them in a cupcake pan. And when I took it to church to show them what had happened, they laughed, but guess what? You couldn't get the stuff out. Did you end up losing that pan? Yeah. It's all right. It was worth it. And the house smelled really sweet for a while. Right. How do you think they turned out? Terribly. Are we surprised? No. Are we surprised our homes don't work out properly when we don't use the right ingredients? We are. We are. Because people come up to me and they tell me, I know I raised my child right. What could have possibly happened? Well, did you take out church attendance and add something else in that shouldn't have been there? Yeah. Yeah. Particular family I'm working with right now, their children are in a lot of trouble. Serious, grave, deep trouble. Parents come to me and says, we raised them right. We raised them in church. We were faithful to church. We were faithful to God's service. We did everything like we're supposed to do. I thought, well, that's strange. If you did everything like God told you to do, then why do the cookies turn out like they did? Because the Bible says in Proverbs 22:6, which we will look at, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. The Bible doesn't say he'll depart from it, hang out for a while, and eventually maybe come back. The Bible says he will not depart from it. And so why, if they did everything right, do the kids turn out like this? So I was talking to one of the children, an adult child, and he was talking to me about his home life growing up, and I said, look, got a question for you. Did your parents ever skip church for extracurricular activities? Did they ever take the flour out of the recipe? Did they ever swap the chocolate chips for the salt? Oh yeah, all the time. We were gone for this activity and gone for this activity. All summer long, it was nothing for us to miss church, 3/4 of the time. Where's the truth? The truth is in the recipe, right? The truth is how it's used. God's recipe for success will turn out right. Why do I tell you this? To encourage you. But if there's going to be any hope for our families, we have to be honest with ourselves. Example, Long time ago, my parents and I were on a trip. Dad was speaking in a church. And my brother is a big fan of apple cake. And so he and my sister, Hannah, decided they wanted to make apple cake while they were gone. And while we were gone, we got a phone call. And the call went something like this. Mom, yes? Are baking soda and baking powder the same thing? No, they're not. That would explain why the cake tastes different. Guess what? They got those two mixed up. But they were honest about it, and at least they understood why, right? If they had defended it and said they are the same thing, I did everything right, and it's not my fault the cake ended up like that, we would know better, wouldn't we? Imagine if we tried to serve those cookies that the kids messed with the recipe to people. In fact, we had a few people that wanted to try them. My son wanted to take a taste of them. Do you know what they tasted like? Take a wild stab in the dark. Strawberry shampoo and salt. Why? Because guess what there was a lot of in the recipe? Salt and strawberry shampoo. Are we surprised by that? No. And I'm not saying this to be harsh. But if we expect God's blessings on our homes and God has told us how we're going to do it, then we better follow what he says if we expect things to turn out the right way. I got a couple minutes, so in closing, I'm going to tell you an illustration. Now, it requires a disclaimer. Number one, Rachel is in full approval of this illustration, okay? So don't get mad at me. Don't you dare. Number two, this is the only time in our 16 years of marriage this has happened. She fixed something on a Sunday morning. Did we have Stephen yet? No, I think it was early on in marriage. She had been given a book of crock-pot recipes. And so she took this recipe for crock-pot meatloaf. And I forget what all was involved, but it had a cup of ketchup and 2 cups of cheese in it or something. I forget what it was, but she made it on Sunday morning. When we got home from church, we went to sit down and eat it, and we're home, and we're young and we're in love and we're eating, and it was awful. Positively terrible. But I grew up in the clean plate club. Do you know what that means? What's on your plate, you got to finish. And so I'm working through it and thinking, this is bad. This is really quite bad. But I don't say anything. And I'm working my way through it, and Rachel looks at me and she says, this is awful. I said, well, thank the Lord I'm not the only one who thinks so. I didn't say that, but I'm sitting there and it's like, well, she's like, no, it's okay, you can say it. I said, it's terrible. So she got the recipe out and looked at it, and it was a truly terrible recipe. Now, in 16 years of marriage, I think she may have cooked or baked one other thing that I truly did not like, but it was not on this scale. Here's how bad it was. My dad loves meatloaf. Loves. And in fact, he likes it cold and makes meatloaf sandwiches when it's cold. That's awful. But he does. So we took some to him. We said, Dad, we truthfully cannot finish it. I mean, the thought of it is literally making us sick. I'm not exaggerating here. It's making us sick. If you want to try it, great. If you don't care for it, we're not offended. He couldn't eat it. And Dad never turns anything down. That's kind of man he is. So we had at the time 2 Siberian Huskies. If you know anything about Siberian Huskies, they'll eat anything. Anything they're not supposed to eat, they'll eat. So we set it out in their dishes. We're not going to let this food go to waste. Turned their noses up at it and wouldn't touch it. Now, I know it's not a failure on her part. So we go back and look at the recipe, and the combination of cheese and ketchup made it truly terrible. So we knew we had a faulty recipe. But guess what? With God's recipes, there's not a problem there. So if something bad happens in our family, we better go to the mirror and say, where did I mess up? And that's what we're going to do. Lord willing, here's how it's going to work. Tomorrow, we're going to look at the husband-wife relationship. Let me emphasize that again. The husband and wife relationship. God created male and female. Let me just state that from the beginning. Wednesday night, Lord willing, we'll look at the parent-child relationship. How should that be? Thursday night, we'll look at education and somewhat to a certain extent in regards to service and how that should be, family identity from God's perspective. And then Friday night, Lord willing, we're going to look at finances and planning as far as that goes. So that's the format we're looking at for this week. But by way of introduction, we're going to look at God's recipe for successful homes. It doesn't matter what I think. There may be some things, in fact, there will be some things that we go through that I may not thoroughly enjoy, but it doesn't really matter what I think. What matters is, what does God say? And so we're going to follow his recipes if we want his results. Anything in closing before I pray, Pastor?
Yeah, just one thing real quickly. If you think Rachel's meatloaf was bad, Linda's mother
Oh, no.
invited her in-laws over for bean soup. She had never made bean soup, so she got there to kind of serve the bean soup. So she scoops a big ladle in and dumps it in their bowl, and it goes clink, 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 clink.